and then we can have some discussion time at the end. So I want to kind of whip through the actual data in a pretty quick way. So I appreciate some of it will be familiar to you because it's actually repeat information, and some of it may be news to you, so don't hesitate to ask if some of it isn't clear. Okay, and I need to advance the slides. How? Sorry, not working. It's not working. Okay, here we go. I'll use the mouse. Okay, sorry guys. So here's just first of all, I want to note and acknowledge that this report is produced with a collaboration of lots of our coalition partners, but in particular Spark BC, who help with the mapping and a lot of the number crunching and just generally being very helpful. So kudos to them, and also to our partners at Campaign 2000, the national network we're a part of, because they actually negotiate with Stats Canada to get some of the data for us, and we have lots of discussions with our partners who are producing the national report card and the provincial report card as well. Different other provincial report cards. And of course, we want to acknowledge the financial support of the Vancouver Foundation and the United Way of the Lower Mainland. So thanks to them. So jumping right in, there's an introductory introduction in the report, and its message in a nutshell is that there's a severe and long-term crisis of child poverty in a very wealthy province such as BC, and that we are calling for much more urgent response and action from the provincial government. So this report is a call to action. We think the evidence in this report illustrates the child poverty crisis in BC and offers some recommendations for how we could address that crisis. We know that governments make choices about what they spend, what they collect, what revenue they collect, and we know from just watching this data that the current choices are increasing income inequality in the province and across the country, and therefore they're sustaining very high poverty levels, and that's what we want to change. We do note in the introduction that the province of BC has used the community poverty reduction strategies. You may have heard of them. There were some local level initiatives in 7 pilot communities. I think it's now down to 6 communities. And just commenting that we see that as a bit of a diversion and part of a provincial government denial of the need for a provincial poverty reduction plan. Good work happening on the ground in those communities, helping individual families, but this is not a poverty reduction strategy for the province. And so this is, just wanted to note that because we're actually asking for that higher level response. So our call for a comprehensive poverty reduction plan for BC is widely echoed now by, well, 3 budget committee reports, consultations with recommendations to government from the Finance Committee of the Legislature, calling for that. It's been in our report card for a long time, and there are lots of other, the Union of BC Municipalities, individual cities, school boards, lots of organizations, the Representative for Children and Youth, many people have been calling for that. So media, and when we've been doing some media around the launch of the report card, are really asking now, so why is the provincial government so unwilling to move on this? And that's basically we're putting this report out there to help translate that widespread concern of British Columbians, help to mobilize around that, the evidence in this report into the political will that is needed to act on the recommended solutions. So that's pretty much the messaging in the introduction. So this is our 19th Child Poverty Report Card. There are lots of personal stories in this. Families shared their personal stories with us, and this helps put a face to some of the policy issues and the numbers we're putting out in the report card, and that help inform the recommendations. There are also other illustrations, like some information on the $10 a day child care plan, other issues, food bank use, etc., that are covered in the report card. We won't have time to touch on all of those today, but encourage you to read them and use them also as you're using this as a tool for your own public awareness work and advocacy. So we have created a special website for the report card. It's the same URL as we had last year, still1in5.ca, and it's linked also to from the First Call website. You can find it that way. You can find the full report, or you can jump straight into a page sending a letter to the BC Premier supporting the recommendations in the report, as well as you can look at there's new maps of child poverty rates by various geographical areas. So we've got some maps like we had last year, and we'll go through that a bit, and some new ones. You can also watch the very powerful speeches that were given at our news conference yesterday when we launched this. They'll be posted soon, but it'll take a few weeks probably, to First Call's YouTube channel. And these slides that you're seeing today and a recording of this webinar will be available from the website as well. So trying to put as many tools in your hands as we can to make this a really useful tool for people out in the field and all of our coalition members. So let's go to fact sheet 1 in the report card, and if you have a copy up on your screen as well, or I don't, so we'll just sort of march through by the numbers here. But fact sheet 1, first I wanted to show you just so it's 1 in 5 children are poor. This is where we talk about the incidence of child poverty in the province and the number of poor children at almost 170,000, that it's enough to fill Disneyland theme park 4 times. And there are, so these kind of infographics, including one that shows Disneyland, are available on the Still 1 in 5 website. So these are things you can use in social media, in slideshows, or other materials. And you'll find them all. Go to the Spread the Word tab and the social media kit and links on the website. But here's the actual data chart on the incidence of child poverty in BC, and it shows us compared to other provinces and to the Canadian average overall. So this is 2013 data, because we're always 2 years behind, because that's the most recent data available from Statistics Canada. So this chart shows BC in comparison on 2 measures, the low-income measure, we call it the LIM, after tax and before tax. The darker red bars are the after tax, and that's the number or the percentage that's used in most of the other data in the report card. But we show both the before and after tax rates here for all the provinces. And as you can see, BC we're the 5th worst in the country right now. About 4 provinces are worse than us. We are higher than the Canadian average, and so we're at, on the before tax measure, 23.7%, and on the after tax measure, 20.4%, or basically 1 in 5 children, as the infographic said on the previous screen. So we're kind of in the middle of the pack. And we are higher than the national average on both measures. The next chart in fact sheet 1 shows the overall poverty rates by province. Again, we're showing using the LIM data. So this is all ages, population, and you can see BC's second worst of all provinces in the country, and the rate is the after-tax rate is 16.3%, or 19.4 for the before tax measure. Only Manitoba is worse than us, and we again are on this measure of all people's poverty higher than the Canadian average. The thing that note for First Call, because we spend a lot, we're interested in the child and family poverty stats, is that if you notice these numbers are lower than the numbers in the previous screen, and that's the case for all provinces across the country, that the overall poverty rate is lower than the child poverty rate. And that should concern us all, given that children are in the crucial developmental stage, as you would all know, and it just points to that this is a systemic issue, that children overall are poorer than the overall population. So there's some systemic policy changes that we need to make that will better support families in their child rearing years. So we always like to do that comparison. So also in fact sheet 1, we note that in those overall child poverty statistics, there are some groups of BC children and Canadian children generally, who are overrepresented in the poverty statistics. And here we've had to draw on data because the long-form census was canceled and not done properly in 2011. We had to scramble a bit for data, but we used for the first 2 numbers on that slide, First Nations children and other Aboriginal children. You can see the poverty rates there of 48% and 28%. And that comes from the last time we did a long-form census, so that's 2006 census data. And then we also pulled some data from the National Household Survey, which was the voluntary replacement for the long-form census that was published in 2011. And there you can see, and again, this isn't children's data, but all ages data for recent immigrants and visible minorities or racialized communities. You can see they also have pretty high poverty rates. So we just always want to point that out. And of course, there's another group, children with disabilities, and very importantly, children in female lone parent or in lone parent families are also included in these overrepresented groups. So always, and we're looking forward to the reinstatement. The federal government has said they will reinstate the long-form census, so hopefully in future we'll have, again, more accurate data to report on these groups. Because when we call for an overall poverty plan, we want to make sure that these overrepresented groups benefit from whatever changes are made or whatever targets are set, that the poverty rates lower as much as the overall rate. So I'll just pause there for a second. Are there any questions on fact sheet 1, so on the incidence of child poverty as it stands in 2013? And I guess, sorry, I'm just glancing over here. No questions? Okay. I'll move on to fact sheet 2. So this is where we look at poverty rates over time, trend data, and so we got some data from Statistics Canada about when the first resolution went through the House of Commons, when we signed the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, so kind of a very important date, 1989, when we promised to end child poverty in Canada by the year 2000. And so we always use that as a benchmark. How are we doing since that promise was made? We're not doing well, as you can see from this infographic or from the stats here, that we've gone from 15.5% to 20.4% in over those 24 years. So not a good story. Here's the graph in the next slide that looks at, so when we had to change data sets just because of a number of cuts and changes to things at Statistics Canada. So in last year's report card and this year's report card, we shifted the data set we were using and also we couldn't compare what we were getting now to all the way back. So we got the specific data for 1989, but couldn't afford actually, and Stats Canada wasn't able to give us quickly the data for all the intervening years. So we don't have those really long timelines anymore in the report card, but we have as of 2000 up to 2013. So we have 13 years of data there, so you can see the trend data. And of course, the first thing, and also to let you know, this is tax filer data now that we're using. So the measure of child poverty we're using is the low income measure after tax in this chart. But the data set, so the income data that we're using to benchmark against that low income measure is tax filer data. And we're quite confident that it's quite robust because it comes directly from people's tax returns, and it captures even people who don't have taxable income but collect the universal child tax benefit, or child care benefit it was called. So those are all captured in that data as well. So we're quite confident that it's a comprehensive data set. So as you can see in this graph, BC's child poverty rate over that period of time has always been higher than the Canadian average. And it started at about 1 in 4 children, so it was over 25%, and then it's come down now over the course of 13 years to 1 in 4 children at 20 or 20.4%. So a slight decrease, but really overall very high numbers and very slow movement over 13 years. During which time there were in British Columbia budget surpluses. So often when we're talking with government about the evidence in this report, and the answer is, well, we can't do anything because of the budget or the economy at the time. This 13-year period goes through quite a few different budget cycles and circumstances, both globally and locally. And in all of that time, there was very little progress. So we also do a graph in fact sheet 2 that just puts the numbers out there because we want people to understand sometimes percentages don't mean anything to people. So here's the actual numbers of poor children across that time series as well. So starting back in 2000 when there were 221,000 poor children in BC to 2013 where there's 167 or almost 168,000 poor children in BC on this measure. And so there was the change over 2012 to 2013, sort of the year-to-year most recent change, was pretty small. It was about 1,600 children changed, which is a 0.2 or 0.2% drop. We figure at this rate it would take over 100 years to eliminate child poverty in BC. So we're again trying to get the public and government to understand the urgency of doing something more than what we're doing now, because it's hundreds of thousands of children are growing up in poverty year after year, and expressions of sympathy or saying we're doing okay, we're gradually bringing it down, seem woefully inadequate in the face of those numbers. So also in fact sheet 2, we give data on the under 6 or the early childhood poverty rate in BC and in Canada. And here we got some data from Statistics Canada that benchmarked it in 1989, in 2000, and 2013. So you can see it used to be a bit lower, or sorry, a bit higher in 1989, and then it went up even higher at the beginning of this decade or so, and then went down to 20.7%. That's 0.3% higher than the overall child poverty rate. So we're always concerned when the young children's poverty rate is either at or higher than the overall children's poverty rate because of the particular vulnerability of children's development in those early years. This figure, 20.7%, represents 55,520 of BC's youngest children, or just over 1/5 of the youngest children in the province. So, and when we'll get to at the end, Appendix 2 has some mapping data for urban areas around the province. We looked at the differential between the early childhood poverty rate and the overall child poverty rate. And in most cases, it's pretty close. Again, in most cases, the early childhood poverty rate is a bit higher, but not dramatically, except in some places, and I'll mention 3, Prince Rupert, Powell River, and Duncan, where the under 6 child poverty rate was 5 percentage points or more higher than the overall child poverty rate. So again, food for thought when we look at the Human Early Learning Partnership, EDI, Early Development Instrument data showing 33% of children entering school vulnerable across the province in one or more developmental domains. This kind of underscores for us the impacts of child poverty as one of those social determinants of health and development. So any questions on fact sheet 2, where we're looking at the overtime series? Just pausing to see. Okay. Okay, so I won't stop and wait for questions each time. If you have questions, just go ahead and plug it in, and Serena will let me know here. Okay, so moving on to fact sheet 3. This is where we look at child poverty by family type. And here's where gender, the feminization of poverty definitely comes into the picture here. So the statistics we have are for all lone parent families, but it's worth noting that 83% of lone parent families in 2013 were female-led. So we are talking mostly about single mother families. So overall, children in lone parent families only make up about 20%, 19.8, 20% of the child population. So most children are in couple families, and only 1/5 of them are in single parent families. But when you look at the statistics for poor children, they make up almost half of the poor children in the province. So that's the overrepresentation we can see there very dramatically of children in single parent families. And we know that the median income difference for lone mothers versus lone fathers is rather significant. Lone mothers make about 65% of what lone fathers make. So there's those gender issues coming up there, just in wage discrimination or the way the labor force is organized by gender. So here's the chart that maps this out, the difference between lone parent families. So again, since poor children in single parent or lone parent families have that much higher risk of being poor, the risk is actually 1 in 2 children. 50%, 50.3% of children in single parent families in the province are poor, which is an astounding, I think, astounding statistic to look at. So half of them, whereas for children in couple families, who make up the majority of children in families, it's only 13%. So that hugely elevated risk of poverty for children in single parent families. And this, again, looks at it over time, so you can see over the 13 years what's been the change. Well, not a lot. It started a little higher back in 2000 for single parents and went down a little bit over time, but it's been creeping up over the last 4 years again to get over the 50% mark again. So we can look later on. When we looked at this data in other provinces, we saw that, so that's a 4% decrease, for instance, between 2000 and 2013 over time. When we looked at other provinces, some of them like Quebec and Newfoundland dropped their lone parent poverty rate by 21%, or Nova Scotia by 17%. So BC could do a lot better in bringing this very, very high statistic down. So then we look at the depth of poverty in fact sheet 4. So here we're looking at, because we know that a lot of parents are way below the poverty line, and that's what this chart shows. So we're looking here at the median income of low-income parents, so those who are already captured in the poverty statistics, and look at them by family type. What's the average poor lone parent with one child? You can see in the chart is earning $14,300. That's the median income for that family type, and for a couple with one child, it's $17,680 they're earning. And you can see in the red part of the bar the gap. So all of them are at least $10,000 below the poverty line for their family type. And that's a big gap. And some of them, of course, because that's a median, would be living even on less than that, which is a little shocking when you start to think about living on less than, we're trying to raise a child on less than $14,000 a year. So the gaps are very big. And then we moved to fact sheet 5. This is something new we added to the report card this year. We wanted to look at food insecurity and housing insecurity, or the challenges in this area. And again, the issue of lone parents, and particularly female lone parents, comes to the fore. So we see dramatically, so what this chart is showing is reported, it's survey data that's from 2011 and 12. And it's showing reported food insecurity, and this is moderate to severe food insecurity. So there were those who reported mild food insecurity, but we only recorded the moderate to severe reports, and that's what these data are showing, that lone parents, you can see, are almost at a quarter, 23.7 or 24% of lone parents with children reported that they went hungry, or the way the definition is compromising the quality or the quantity of food available. And also for children, it's 14%. But what we know from lots of anecdotal reports is that lots of low-income parents will, if food's scarce, they will feed their children first and themselves second. And that's what's reflected in these graphs, both for couple families and for single-parent families. And we know, and there's some data in the report card about food bank users. Actually, what's in the report card is 2014 data, because when we went to print, it wasn't. The 2015 data hunger count report hadn't come out, but the new report shows that 31.5 of the 100,000 or so food bank users in BC were children. So that's over 31,000 children were using food banks. And that was an increase overall of 3%, all ages, in use between 2014 and 2015. And of course, we know the consequences for this kind of, that food security has, or lack of food security has, on health and development of children, on parents' health, as well as their stress levels. We're not always our best when we're hungry, at our best, so it affects their parenting, reasonably so. And so this is a real concern. When we look at core in the next slide, also in fact sheet 5 on housing challenges, so this is looking at core housing need among families in BC, and that's defined as living in housing that is either too small, so overcrowded, inadequate in size for the family size, in need of repair or major repair, or unaffordable, so taking up way too much of the family budget. So those are the 3 criteria for core housing need. And again, you can see the red bars here are the percentage of children who are living in lone parent families who are in core housing need. You can see the provincial comparisons and see that BC stands out only on the lone parent measure, or on frequency of core housing need. Only Saskatchewan is worse than us, so we're at 32.8, almost 33% of all children in lone parent families are in core housing need, and we top the charts with couple families. So in 2-parent families, in core family needs, we go over 10%. We're the only province that has over 10%, almost 11% of children in those families who are in core housing need. And this doesn't capture core housing need on First Nations reserves, so that's a big gap and would make these figures quite conservative. So moving along to fact sheet 6, the percentage of poor children with one or more parents who are employed. So over the years, as we've tracked this, we always talk about that, or let people know that if there's a stereotype that poor children mostly are on income assistance or on welfare, or their parents don't work, that's not the case. Most poor children in most provinces, and certainly in BC, have parents who work. And what this first graph shows is that almost a third of poor children had at least one parent working full-time, full year. These are 2011 data. We know that lots of other parents are also working, but they may not work full year, they may not work full-time, or a combination of those. So they have precarious work or insufficient work to earn enough. It also, we also know that lots of families who work full-time, well, this particular graph shows that they're working full-time and they're still poor. It points to one thing, that this is a low-wage trend of a lot of parents who are working and just not earning enough, even though they're working full-time. So this leads us, of course, to some of our advocacy around living wages and trying to raise awareness for employers to pay living wages. Because there's a large number of low-wage jobs. That's one of the driving factors of child poverty in this province, is quite a polarized labor force of some people who are doing very well and earning a lot, and a lot of low-wage jobs and precarious jobs. So even when people have steady periods of employment, they're not making enough. And one of the ways we look at, we have a floor that, except for farm workers and live-in caregivers and a few others who are unfortunately exempted from that, but the minimum wage should serve as a floor for working people. And it's the minimum wage in BC right now is $10.45 an hour. It just went up 20 cents in May. Since May of 2012. So we will have the lowest minimum wage again soon. We were the lowest for a while, and it went up a little bit, but when New Brunswick raises theirs, they're scheduled to raise theirs to $11 an hour in the next year or so. And ours is now indexed, but indexed to inflation, which is quite small, so it's not likely to catch up to the other provinces unless we give it more of a boost. So we're concerned about anybody trying to raise a child on minimum wage. A single parent, if they're working full-time at minimum wage, with one child would be $8,400 below the poverty line. And two parents working full-time, if they both earned a minimum wage, would be about $1,100 or $1,200 below the poverty line for a two-parent, two-child family, a four-person family. So in this report, in our recommendations, we're calling for this province to adopt or move to, as soon as possible, a $15 an hour minimum wage, and keep it indexed, of course, but to bump it up. Because so you can see that trying to make work pay enough to lift families out of poverty, we probably really need living wages, as this next slide shows. And so we talk a bit in the report card, in fact sheet 6, about the living wage campaign, which First Call hosts. You can see here the living wages that are calculated for a number of communities around the province. They range from a low of $16.29 on Cortes Island to a high of $20.68 for Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, and that would be with two parents with two young children working full-time at 35 hours a week. If they both earned that, that would lift them above the poverty line and into a circumstance that took them out of chronic financial stress. We do that calculation every year. And you can see some on the other chart on this slide, some statistics on the percentages in three areas: Greater Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Abbotsford Mission area. We just took a look at a couple families with children and what their incomes were and what percentage of them were below the regional living wages for those areas. And you can see it's significant. It's over almost a quarter in the Victoria area, over a quarter in the Abbotsford Mission area, and 39% of a couple families with children are earning less than living wage in Vancouver area. So it's another way to look at or to reinforce what we know about the high levels of families raising their children in poverty. In fact sheet 7, we look at children on welfare. They don't make up the majority of poor children, but they make up some of the poorest and most challenged families in the province. So here's what this graph shows is children on what two types of families: lone parent with one child and a couple with two children, what their total incomes, if they were on income assistance, were in 1989 and in 2013. And we show that time series to show a couple of things. One, that actually the total value, because we adjust these into 2013 dollars, so the total value of the income, and this is after all kinds of child credits and welfare benefits, etc., is actually lower now in 2013 dollars than the buying power is lower than it was in 1989 for both types of families. So that's very concerning, and that's partly because welfare rates have not been increased in BC since 2007. There have been some changes to asset levels for people on disability and earnings exemptions and a few other things, but the actual rates have not been moved for the last 8 years, so we've had steadily decreasing buying power for those families. So we see, yeah, the gaps. You have to do a bit of math with this chart when you're looking at the report card, but the gap for the lone parent family on income assistance, for instance, would be about close to $7,000. The poverty gap between that poverty line that's shown there of $24,000 and then what they're actually earning in 2013, or what they're actually getting on income assistance. So that's and just to highlight that. And actually the gap, sorry, just for the two-parent couple, a couple family with 2 children, the gap there is close to $13,000. So way below the poverty line for these 2 family types. Over 80% of the children on income assistance in 2013 were in lone parent families. Most of them were led by women. Again, another pointing to the women's poverty and women and children poverty. They represent less than a quarter of all the poor children in the province. Because there were about 35,000 or so children on average who were on income assistance in 2013. 64% of those children's parents were on disability assistance, had a medical condition that kept them from working, had persistent multiple, or were temporarily excused from working. So most of these children were living with parents who could not work for one reason or another. And the other thing we show in this graph is the declining over time between 1989 and 2013, the declining share of welfare incomes that's paid by the province. So the gray box has gotten bigger. So for the federal, that's the federal contribution, and that's actually more than doubled. So things like child tax benefits have gone up, and BC has subsequently reduced its contribution to welfare incomes, and that's something we'd like to see changed. We'd like to see whatever their contribution is sustained, and if federal benefits go up, then those families would benefit from that increase rather than staying at ground zero. So one of the things we know to illustrate the power of public policy, because we do note in the report card some of the changes that have been made to welfare policy over the last year that are positive, and one of them was the elimination of the welfare clawback of child support, and that reduced the depth of poverty, as you can see on the slide, for over 5,400 children. This is Becky and Sophie, 2 parents who were affected, and then for them it was significant. It was $400 a month that Becky was allowed to keep that had been coming into her bank account and disappearing, and as of September this year she's now able to keep, and she's quite ecstatic about that. For some parents it meant $50 a month, but it's still, on a very low income, $50 a month is a lot. So we're very happy that after a lot of mobilization and advocacy over many years, that clawback was ended, as was then a second one, the orphans benefit. So when one parent dies who was on disability, there's on CPP disability pension, there's an orphans benefit for the surviving spouse to help raise any children in the family, and that was being clawed back as well. And they eliminated that thanks to some advocacy as well, and that helped about another 50 to 100 families. There's the new single-parent employment initiative that I won't have time to go into the details of, but that recognized for the first time that since the beginning of the 2000s, when people were not allowed, with some changes in legislation, to stay in a post-secondary program if they wanted to receive assistance. So now single parents can do that if they can get into this program. They can stay on assistance. They can have their child care paid for, which is a really good move on the part of government, and there's up to $7,500 of their tuition paid and some transportation costs. The program can't be more than 12 months though, and it has to be approved. So there's some we hope not too many challenges for single parents who want to take advantage of that. And there'll also be child care coverage if they move out of school into work for the next 12 months. So 2 years of child care coverage at the best of cases. So we're happy to see that happen. In fact sheet 8, we look at, this is where we get into some maps. And so what fact sheet 8 is the regional districts all around the province, looking at the poverty rate for different regional districts. And so 23 out of 29 regional districts in BC had at least 1,000 children living in poverty. Here's the map that you'll see, and when you go online it's easier to blow it up so the numbers are a little easier to see. There's little arrows this time showing whether it decreased or increased from last year, the rate for each region. The dark regions on the map are where the very black ones are where it's over 40% or poverty rate, up to 40 to 50 something percent, and so the darker is the worst. And you can see you can enlarge these and take a look at them. So that's the geographical distribution by regional district. It's really hard to see the Metro Vancouver Regional District in that one, so we do a separate map for that in fact sheet 9. And here you can see, so again, just the same color coding. The depth of poverty is the darker the color, the higher the rate of poverty. And you can, if this is done by census tract, so the sort of neighborhoods. We also have on the website, they're not in the printed report card, but on the website under the map section, there's additional maps that break out additional municipalities, so Richmond or the Langleys or the Tri-Cities area, that kind of thing. So you can see those up close and look at the census tracts of the neighborhood patterns in the Metro Vancouver area. So there's 8 additional maps in there. We know that each census tract in this area had that had at least 20 poor children living in them. A good number of them, we know, well, and the reason we break this one out so carefully is because 51% of all the poor kids in the province live in this area. Every census tract, as I said, had 20 poor children. 78% of these census tracts had at least 100 poor children living there. So again, pretty widely distributed issue. Half of them had poverty rates at the provincial average of 20% or higher. Only 6% had poverty rates that were under 10%. So again, just emphasizing how widespread this issue is. So then there's a section in the report card, fact sheet 10, that looks at income inequality because it's one of the chief causes of high poverty levels is the growing income inequality. So this is data that we've published before from 2011. We can't get new data yet from Statistics Canada, but we're working on it. But it shows the breakdown of the income pie for BC families with children. You can see a quarter, the richest 10% take home a quarter of the pie, and the poorest 50% take home basically 50%. 25%, so an equal amount to the top 10%. So we're very concerned. It's an international trend. We know that it creates poor child outcomes overall when you have a big gap between rich and poor and a growing one, and generally an unhealthy society. So a trend we want to counter. This is another infographic. In the actual report card, there's a data chart that shows all the 10 deciles, and you can see exactly between 1989 and 2011 how much their income increased or decreased. So the bottom 30% or the bottom 3 deciles actually lost income. As you can see for the bottom 10% here in this infographic, it went down $733 over that 24-year period. They actually, or 22-year period, they actually lost ground, while the richest families, and this is just income, not wealth, the richest families' incomes increased rather at a much higher pace. So this, and when I say that's income data, not wealth data, that means it's pretty conservative because usually income and wealth accumulation also go together. We added a new chart this year in fact sheet 10 looking at, now this isn't children or families, but this is overall median income for individuals in BC income growth, just again to sort of reinforce that 1% versus the 99%, or you can do it by the top 10% versus the bottom 90%. So if we use the 1 and the 99, you can see the top 1% had an income growth in that period of 41%, and the bottom 99, 0.3, 0.3%. If you want to go to the top 10th of a percent, you can see astronomical growth in that really high income area. And there's actually, you can get into the hundreds of a percent. We couldn't fit it on the chart, so it's so high. The increase is so high. So just another representation, and looking again at the bottom 50% overall, bear 4% growth over 22 or whatever it was years. So, and we highlight in the report card some research from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives looking at the the way the tax system has grown to favor, and this is in BC, so that the richest families are now paying a tax rate of about 11%, and the poorest families are paying a 14 to 15%. So this is why we have a recommendation at the end of the report about making our tax system fair, and then added onto that, looking at some of those things that would effectively are flat taxes, like MSP premiums, where they are much higher for a modest income family than for as a percentage of their income than a high income family. So all of which illustrates in fact sheet 11 the importance of government help. We've talked about the child support clawback being eliminated, all those things. So when government help, when we can look at one of the stats we get from Stats Canada is what would be their market income before government transfers like child tax credits and the progressive tax system, etc. What would be just their earned income? What is their income? And then what is it after all those transfers are applied? And 63 or almost 64,000 BC children were lifted out of poverty in 2013 thanks to government help. So we want people to understand the power of public policy. And so then we show a graph here because our criticism here is that while we did lift 64,000 children out of poverty, BC didn't do as much as other provinces did. So here's an interprovincial comparison in this fact sheet that shows, Quebec, when they took their market poverty rate, they brought it down 47%. PEI brought theirs down 40%, etc., as you can see in the chart there, whereas BC only brought ours down 28%, and again, that's below the Canadian average. So BC's poverty rate before, for just at market level, was I think it was 28.7%, and we brought it down to 20 points. So that's a 28% drop there. But we could do a lot better on that, as other provinces have done. And if you're interested in what we mean by government transfers and all that, that's explained a bit in the report card. There's a number of examples in fact sheet 11 that describe that. So we get to the recommendations. I don't want to take up too much time because I want to get to some conversation here and other questions if you have them. But there's 21 recommendations in this report card. The overarching recommendation is to adopt a poverty reduction plan that's legislated, that has targets and timelines so we can hold ourselves accountable. And we're proposing a goal, and we proposed this quite a while ago when the poverty rate in BC at that time was 14%, and we were suggesting let's cut it in half by 2020. I think we made that recommendation in 2010, so we said let's give ourselves 10 years and cut it in half. We have not moved the benchmark. We're making the same recommendation because we don't think we should move the goalpost because of government's failure to act. So we're still recommending let's get it down below 10% to 7%. We've got 4 years to do it. Let's see what we can do. So there's a number of, and we want to make sure that all those particularly overrepresented groups that we mentioned, so that would be children of recent immigrants and refugees, Aboriginal children, children in female lone parent families, racialized families, children with disability, who are at greater risk of living in poverty. Make sure that whatever plan is put in place also directly affects the poverty rates for these overrepresented groups to achieve reduction. So I'll skate through these really quickly because some of them I've touched on. There are about 15 of these of the 21 recommendations that are directed to the provincial government. Some are directed to both senior levels of government, and some specifically are policy recommendations to the federal government. So we've talked about all those income things like paying living wages and raising the minimum wage and increasing income assistance rates. There's another clawback we're still working on here, the federal maternity parental benefits that are paid when someone's in a relationship and with someone on disability. That'll be clawed back from the partner's disability, so it actually plunges families deeply into poverty during the time when they're receiving their earned maternity benefits. We'd like to see, so here's a redesign question, number 5 here, looking to other provinces to get good ideas. BC instituted an early childhood tax benefit. It took effect, I believe, in April of this year. And it only covers children under 6, and it's $55 maximum a month, or $660 a year maximum. And we'd like to see that because this is good policy. It does lift children. It's money in families' pockets, and it's income tested, and so it goes to those who most need it. But Ontario has what we're recommending here, that their child benefit isn't just for early childhood. It goes all the way up to age 17, and it's double what BC has on offer. So we think we could do something more robust as Ontario has. And that's one of our new recommendations is here. 6 to 10 here, we've got everything from, so we're also recommending that the federal government act on their proposed new child benefit, which we're quite happy about, but that over their mandate they stretch it to keep it, make sure it continues to have the power to lift lots of children out of poverty. There's a number of things that we really want some attention, of course, always in our recommendations to a whole suite of measures for First Nations children, whether it's welfare funding, education funding, health services. We want a long-term plan, and hopefully with some action on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. These are the short form of our recommendations. The longer terms, the longer wording is in the report card that references the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a guide to developing a plan around this. Of course, we want the $10 a day child care plan because that's a huge obstacle for single parents, as well as couple families who can't find affordable child care and one parent has to stay home. And then, there's a bunch of other things out. With refugees in the news so much right now, there's 2, 12, and 13 I'll just point to around refugee transportation loans, intensifying efforts to help immigrants and refugees adjust, so make sure all those settlement services are well funded, that they don't experience discrimination in the work, in either finding housing or in employment, those kinds of things. Student debt levels for young, often affecting especially young families, so we have, again, recommendations around tuition fees, student grants instead of loans, making the loans interest-free, so this, to help young families get out from underneath that debt, and or even those who feel they can't take on that kind of debt and therefore can't get the post-secondary education they need. In BC, that's been the whole education issues come up also around the scrapping recently of the education guarantee that used to allow all adult education students in adult basic education students to go to school for free and do English language training. Some of those have now been have tuition barriers for those who are graduates, and we'd like to see, we think that's folly, because these are exactly people who may not be able to afford to pay, but certainly could use the help to get ahead, to get the kind of job that might support their families well. Lots of focus in our recommendations also, and in our work at First Call around supporting youth transitioning out of government care, because there's often a pipeline straight to either homelessness or certainly living on income assistance or poverty, and so we want to see that those supports strengthened and perhaps the age of foster care extended, and focusing on some very specifically at-risk groups, also queer and transgender youth, make sure that because there's a higher homelessness rate because of sometimes just losing family support and or ending up in care more often, those kinds of things. So we want to see some attention there. The employment insurance system, that's the parental benefits are paid through that for when people are on mat leave, and a lot of people don't qualify anymore, but those who do, if they have low wages, it's very hard to take advantage of the full parental leave because they can't afford to live on 55% of the wage they were earning. So there's a lot of reforms we could do there to make that a much more robust policy. Housing issues, of course, to be dealt with, some health issues. We're recommending that key things like prescription drug, eye care, dental care, those should be included as part of our universal health care. So we want the federal and provincial government to cooperate on that. And the very last one is, again, to look at our tax system and make sure that any reforms look at reducing income inequality. So those are the range. Just quickly skating across, we have an appendix, so if you're interested in all those poverty lines we keep referring to, they're in the back. This is the after-tax chart, and there's a before-tax chart as well, and they're explained in the back. This is Appendix 2, the new maps that you can go onto the website and zoom in on if you're interested, but there's the number and the percentage of children in all the non-metro Vancouver area urban areas around the province. So this is the overall child poverty rate map. There's a second map that maps the 0 to 6 poverty rate, or the under 6 poverty rate. So you can see those. And there's some areas where it's quite phenomenally high. The under 6 rate is as high as like 37% in some communities. So that's, I think, good information for us as advocates to have in hand when we're talking to our elected officials, to the public, trying to raise awareness around the issue of child poverty and how deep it is in some communities. I think that's all of it. I just want to note that you can see the national report card and the other provincial report cards on the Campaign 2000 website, so we've included it on this slide. And so now I will stop for questions. If anybody's got some typed in or not. No questions so far. Okay. So we hope you will take advantage, all of you who have are interested in using this in your work. We'll hope you take advantage of it to go to the website, use it for educating your MPs, your MLAs, your public, your city council, your school boards, your regional districts, whoever will listen to you, and as well as arming your local population, your families, your nonprofit agencies, and certainly all the partner member agencies in our coalition who want to be able to use this in their work to see if we can move the dial on some of these larger policy issues and see if we can get particularly the provincial government to kind of move out of denial that we need a plan here. I'll just mention that the federal government, the new federal government has issued a directive to their new Children, Families, and Social Development Minister to develop a national poverty reduction strategy, and that they should work with the provinces to align that national strategy with the provincial strategies. And if we don't have a provincial strategy, there's not much to align with. So I hope that will function, or we hope that will function as some added pressure on the provincial government here in BC to actually develop a comprehensive plan that can then align with the national plan. So I think I'll stop there, and we don't have any questions. Feel free to give us an email, give us a call. If there's something that wasn't clear in this webinar, it will be posted, and the slides will be posted. The recording of it will be posted on the Still 1 in 5 website, and you're welcome to use any of it in all of your work for children in BC. Thanks very much for attending, and good luck with your work.